Hello, welcome again to FAIRtax Power Radio. I'm Bob Paxton,
Bob Scarborough.
and we have a special guest with us today,
I'm
former
John
Congressman,
Linder.
former Congressman John Linder, the original sponsor of the FAIRtax way back in 1999. So Congress moves kind of slow sometimes. This thing's been up in front of them for 20 years, and they hadn't passed it yet. So we're going to have to see what we can do about changing that around.
Well, as you know, that this is not going to pass unless it's demanded from the local level, because there's too much interest in Washington in being able to use the tax code to reward and punish. And there's simply not an aptitude for changing it. Much of downtown Washington, the lobbying class, comes from the Hill, and about half of them have an interest in gaming the tax code.
Oh, yeah. Millions of dollars are spent trying to game the system.
That's right. And so
It's,
a member of Congress has former staffers all over Washington that they stay there long enough to get a big job in a lobbying firm. And so his former staffers with whom he still talks and he enjoys their company, they quietly talk to him and say, well, it's not that easy. We got to wait a while. We're going to have to wait a while on this. Have to really study it. And there is immense inertia against the fair tax in the Washington lobbying community. And so
well, actually,
it come from the people.
what it's going to take really to bring it into the national conversation is for a major presidential candidate to make it a visible part of his or her platform, whichever it is. And to that end, the reason we have you on the program today, you just recently wrote a letter to Donald Trump urging him to support the fair tax. Tell us the story behind that.
Well, I believe that his principal interest in the United States is to try and grow the economy and get us out of the mess we're in financially. And nothing will do it quicker or more efficiently than the fair tax. And so I made some points to him that I thought he should consider, but I don't have a way to reach him. He is pretty well protected by a variety of people. So I just did an open. We bought ads on X to spread that. It got pretty good attention. It got enough eyeballs to hopefully somebody hand it to him. We also know through Randy Fisher, who, as you guys know, is a good fair taxer down in Florida, that it got to people around him. I made sure Newt saw it, and Newt talks to people around Trump all the time and to Trump. And I just hope that somebody would put it in front of him and let him read it. I have not heard back.
Well, go ahead, Bob.
How, just so our listeners know, when did this letter go out? When did you send the open letter?
It's about the 10th or 11th of April.
Okay, so it hadn't been that long. It's been give or take a month from the time this program will actually go on the air. It is a challenge to get to people that, I mean, Trump obviously is busy in 5,000 different directions, but then people that are around him have their own orbit that they're in.
Yes.
And that's a challenge, much in the same way as it is if you're in Congress, in dealing with communication. Do you think he knows about the fair tax? I'll open the question to either Bob or you, John.
I think he knows about it. I think it was discussed with him in 2016, and he put it aside rather quickly. This is also something a candidate's staff does not want to talk about because it's a big idea. Most candidates' staffs and even members of Congress staff do not like very large ideas because it consumes so much time up and effort to get the attention nationwide that you need. So my guess is that someone brought it to him. He got talked out of it. I was told once that he said that the people would think I'm trying to save too much on my taxes if I got rid of the income tax. But now that we know, we've seen his income taxes, and like most wealthy people, he doesn't pay them because he has enough depreciable assets to keep his tax burden very, very low. So he'd be paying way more in taxes if we had the fair tax, as would almost all billionaires, because they spend a lot of money and they'd be paying while they spent it. But I tried to make that point to people around him, and because it would raise his tax burden, and he could say that. but I haven't got any response back.
Yeah. Can you imagine how much it cost him to prepare that tax return that only, took $750 from him? His tax burden would go up under the fair tax for sure, but his compliance cost would go way down, almost to zero.
I'm guessing that as the compliance costs are in the tens of millions, not
Abs-
just to prepare the return, but every decision he makes as a business person, he makes based on tax consequences. And
mhm.
tax lawyers and tax accountants go through all of the tax code and all of the decision making. There's an immense amount of money wasted just trying to consider whether you make a business decision or not based on the tax consequences. And I think for someone like him and all the assets that he holds across the world, it's in the tens of millions of dollars or more.
As a businessman, he has to see what a boon to the economy the fair tax would be. But I'm thinking just how easily can he kind of save face on this? Because back during the primary, he was giving Ron DeSantis a hard time. DeSantis, the governor down here in Florida, who was a fair tax co-sponsor and a very vocal, proponent of it. And Trump called him Ron DeSales tax. As
Well,
if, I'm,
he also used a bunch of Democrat arguments against it. The typical argument the Democrats have always used against it are it's going to add 23% to the cost of your groceries and your medicine. And when I heard Trump using those arguments, I thought, well, he's heard about the tax. He's got the wrong side of it.
There's a lot of confusion with the general population because you have fair tax, flat tax, and those words in a lot of people's minds are interchangeable, almost as if they were the same thing, without digging in a little bit on the fair tax and understanding that it completely removes the income tax at the federal level and switches it over to consumption. There was a point that you made in the letter. You asked a question, what will happen? And then you gave several examples. So what would happen if we enact the fair tax? And number 4 stuck in my mind. And I think a lot of folks need to understand this one simple part of it, and they'll go, oh, I get it now. And I'll read it if you don't mind.
Please.
We will, for the first time ever, tax wealth instead of wages. For those worried that the rich won't pay their fair share, I note that all wealth is ultimately consumed, if not by the earner, then by the heirs. Even money contributed to charities is ultimately consumed and will be taxed. And if Elon Musk wants to move to a farm and grow his groceries and never pay taxes, we won't care. We will borrow his money and create jobs with it. And I think that's that one point stuck in my mind because it clearly showed that no matter what you're spending it on, it's going to get spent. The money's going to get spent at some point in time. It's not just going to lay fallow in the dirt and not be used somewhere. And of course, we know that a person like Donald Trump or any other job creating individual who's out there taking risks and putting their capital in place and creating ideas and moving things forward and innovating will continue to do so, and they might end up getting a farm and growing groceries, but they might continue and enjoy the extra money that they're making because now they're not taxed at the federal level on income, and their businesses will flourish even greater.
Just imagine how much more income would flow to wealthy people if they could make a decision in their businesses based on the interests of their customers, their employees, and their shareholders, and not the tax man. They would make instant decisions, and they would make good decisions, and the money would flow. Back to your point about taxing wealth and not wages. The second thing that comes up regularly with that is, but what about charities? And people, I believe for some time that people do not give money to charities for the tax deduction only. I made the point that my mother gave her money to the Catholic Church every weekend, and she never deducted anything in her life. She never filed a tax return that had deductions, but she made that contribution, and most people do. The great charities that have been given away in this country were given away before the 1913 tax bill came into effect. The Carnegies built 2,500 libraries with their money. They didn't get to deduct anything. And I also noted in that article, and I'll repeat it here, that much of the charity we see now, you recall that Bill Gates and Warren Buffett had a gathering some couple decades ago, I think, and wanted to make sure that everybody with money would pledge to give 90% of it to charity. Well, there's no question that Bill Gates has given a lot of money to charity, but it's to his foundation. And what does he do with that foundation? He uses that foundation as a tax-free PR firm for his private investments. And most of the wealth, for example, Zuckerberg, the FAIRtax guy, Zuckerberg, he gave money from his charity to impact the last 2020 election. And he gave $419 million to a charity in Chicago that had planted people into the counting rooms of the ballots for the 2020 election. Most of the big money that goes into foundations now are for personal political purposes, and I'm not the least bit interested in most of them.
All right. One thing that caught my eye when I was reading that letter was the difference between what professional people and their trade organizations believe. You noted the difference between what actual realtors think regarding the fair tax and the National Association of Realtors. Touch on that if you would.
Well, the realtors would come to my office once or twice a year, a group of 15 or 20 of them from my district, and they all want to talk about the fair tax because they knew they could sell more houses. The average income earner would get a 30-40% increase in take-home pay, not having to pay the payroll tax or the income tax taken out of their checks. And while the realtor will tell you they sit down with their computer and calculate the value of the mortgage interest deduction, nobody really thinks about that when they go into buy their houses. What they want to know is, do I have enough money in my check?
Can I make the payment?
Well, the Realtors Organization, which has a huge building just a few blocks from the Capitol, brand new, 15 years ago, and hundreds of employees, was really founded to get rid of to protect the mortgage interest deduction. And if we were to get rid of the mortgage interest deduction and any other deduction because there's no income tax to deduct from, what are they to do? So they very, very strongly, in fact, in a primary I had in 2002, they made an independent expenditure of $100,000 to defeat me in that primary. It didn't make much difference, but they wanted me gone. They wanted the fair tax gone. The same thing can be said about the farmers. The Farm Bureau Federation represents 5 million farm families. I was in probably 30 states. In every state I went to, the Farm Bureau wanted to talk to me, and we'd have a big meeting, and I'd give a talk on the fair tax because the principal interest of farmers, some of whom spend tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars, setting up expensive trusts to protect their children when they and their spouse dies, they want to get rid of the death tax. And they even have put an organization together to get rid of the death tax. And at their big meeting in Hawaii several years ago, they wanted to endorse the fair tax as a formal part of the Farm Bureau Federation program. And the bureaucrats who run that program said, well, wait a minute, we need to study this a bit further. This is not that easy, it's complicated, because they were organized to get rid of the death tax. And if we do that, what are they to do? Now, they have friends throughout the communities in Washington. I spoke to the AICPA, the professional CPA organization. They had some harsh questions. It was a breakfast meeting, and they had about 150 people in that big room, and they all had questions. One of the members of the AICPA staff was a very large man named Phil, who had just been the staff director of the Joint Committee on Taxation in the Congress for many years. He was outside now making big money for the AICPA. And as I finished, he raised his hand. I said, Phil, what do you need? And he's kind of smiling. He said, John, just give me 3 more years. Because he knew if we got rid of the tax, they wouldn't have much left to do. And they have friends in the various communities. The Retail Federation was very much against it. Retailers aren't against it. As the Retail Federation gathered with me and some of their CEOs from some of the big box stores, I looked at them and said, call me weird, but I thought you guys had computers by now. And all you'd have to do is make a computer adjustment in your cash registers, and you can calculate this without any extra effort whatsoever. 45 states are already doing this. We pay you for collecting it, just like we pay the states for collecting it. And the CEOs were kind of interested in it, but their staffs at the Retail Federation in Washington were dreadfully opposed to it. That you can find that in every organization across the town.
So the advocates for a business who are in Washington are essentially feeding off the trough that they don't want to have dried up.
That's exactly right.
Possibly, be irrelevant at some point after the fair tax is enacted. That's interesting because it's usually the lieutenants that block you from getting to the decision maker in sales or in any type of communication where you're trying to encourage an industry even to see the benefits. I find this in my small business that I run every day, and it gets to be a challenge when you knock on a door and you can't get to the person that can say, this is what I want to have done, because you have so many people that are literally littered in front. You can't make it to the decision maker's office.
And they have their own interests.
Yes.
Yep, they have their own interests.
Yeah.
All right. Real quickly, it's a fairly lengthy letter that you sent. We're not going to have time to go through all of it here on this program. Tell people who want to read the whole thing how they can get it. Where do they go to look it up?
I don't know.
You don't know.
It's on X. It's on X, and you can go to my @LinderJE to my site on X, and you'll find it in the tweets because I sent it out many different ways, and you'll find it in there.
Okay, let me change gears a little bit. We were talking off camera before we started the recording here about why the media just will not talk about the fair tax. I have said some media people, I've seen them at the CPAC before, and they'll give you a big thumbs up as they walk by, but they'll never say a word about the fair tax on the air. Do you have a theory about why that is happening?
My guess is that most of the national media can talk about one issue at a time. They just talk about and they're mostly interested in presidential politics.
Yeah, right now they want to put Trump in jail.
Yeah, and that's what you're going to hear. That's what you're going to hear for the entire time. I used to debate Steve Forbes. We're friends and had friendly debates on the fair tax versus the flat tax. Much more research has been done on the fair tax. Much more effort, more sponsors than any other reform proposal. But the American people still talk about the flat tax, which was Steve's proposal, a flat tax on income. Fill out your income tax report on a postcard, that story. And the reason is because he ran for president on it. And the public heard it from a presidential candidate. And a funny story, we live in the mountains in North Georgia. My wife and I were stopping in for dinner. We stopped in the bar to have a drink. And as I got up to walk into the dining room, a couple of tables in the bar started screaming flat tax, and cheering. And I had to walk over and explain to them, no, you got it wrong. It's fair tax. But they just know there's a tax bill out there, and the one they were familiar with is a flat tax. But
it's amazing how many people don't know the difference.
No, they don't know the difference. And I've written many articles on the difference between them. The important thing with the flat tax is, and here's what I tell people, that the tax you have today that you've come to know and love is a flat tax on income 110 years later. And it's been flattened many times since then. It was flattened out very heavily in 1986 under Reagan. It was amended 20,000 times in the next 10 years. and 20,000 places. It's now, 75 to 85,000 pages of statute and regulation. As long as we know how much you make and how you make it, we can go after the rest. The fair tax is a system that the government doesn't have any idea how much you make or how you spend it. And there's no way for them to get after it. And we've got to get rid of the record keeping. We don't need any government agency that knows more about us than we're willing to tell our children. And the flat tax requires a IRS in place, because the flat tax taxes profits on businesses. And to get to gross profits, you have to find a way to know what's deductible to take off your gross revenues. And you're going to have an IRS no matter what they say about it, and it's going to change over time.
Yeah, well, the flat tax is still a tax on income. And the fair tax is a tax on consumption. And it's interesting that all of these people that say that a flat tax is going to simplify things, they've got a flat tax bill in Congress, HR 1040, which actually makes it more complicated because it gives people a choice between a flat percentage and staying on the current system. So if 1040 ever became law, we would have parallel tax systems constantly fighting against each other. And they call that simplification. I don't think so.
They still have to deal with the payroll tax.
Oh,
part of which is paid by the employer, part by the employee. There's nothing simple about the flat tax.
There is not. Absolutely.
And as you just said a minute ago, it's been flattened so many times. But what it is it's flat. And what do you do with anything that's flat? You inflate it.
That's right.
Like a flat tire, for example, or, a flat top, or, you end up having a challenge because the next session of Congress, there's going to be a whole new set of options and potential for an increase or something that the government's going to have to pay for. But is it something that my observation is that the coffers of the federal government would swell beyond where they are now? And then the challenge is going to be, what are we going to do with all this money?
I've had many economists even tell me that your problem is you're going to have a bigger government because there's so much money going to come into it. They're going to find ways of spending it rather than cutting the tax. At some point in a free society, you have to trust the people to make the decisions. And if they keep putting people in office who are going to increase their spending because the money is there, then it's their fault. It's their fault.
Yeah, I remember something that my late partner, Ron Malero, used to say. He called the flat tax the lobbyist's full employment bill.
Yes.
That's pretty accurate. Give us an idea, if you will, of just the scope of the lobbying effort in Washington, D.C. directed at the taxation matters.
Well, I've seen it. I've quoted this because I've seen it in several different places, that approximately half of the people lobbying Capitol Hill, of which there are 20 to 30,000 people in that category, virtually half of them are there to game the tax code. Whether they're there for the real estate people or for the farmers or for the accountants or for any other group. I'll give you an example. You've heard of carried interest. That's a category of taxation where you can put together an organization where a small number of people handle the investment of your money, and as it grows, the people in the overall group make money, but the small group of managers of the hedge fund, which it's called, earn a fee off it too. And that fee is called capital gains tax. It's a lower tax. Now, it's an earned tax because they're doing something to earn it. It's never been voted on by Congress. The hedge funders and realtors who put together a lot of these small real estate group deals got together and hired virtually every lobbyist in Washington that deals directly with the tax code. And they went before the IRS and made the case that this is risk capital. And the IRS made a ruling that then it will only be treated as capital gains for tax purposes rather than for that ordinary income. Now that becomes a political issue every 4 years, but nothing is ever done about it because it's got Republicans watching out for the little realtors, and it's got Democrats watching out for Wall Street to protect that carried interest. I said from the beginning, it's earned interest and ought to be treated as earned income and taxed the same way. But that was done through the lobbyists, going directly to the IRS and making the case before them.
And we got just a couple of minutes left. I want to get your thoughts on one more thing, and that's what we talked about last week here on Fairtax Power Radio, the Biden administration's proposal to raise the capital gains tax to over 44%. What effect would that have on the economy?
Destroy investment. It would destroy investment. Risk capital is a unique kind of capital that comes in because people expect to make a lot of money over time. You can't use a capital gains tax until you have it invested for 18 months. And if they raise that higher than the regular earned income tax rate, you're going to find people finding it not interesting to do any risking. And it's going to destroy investments. It's a crazy idea. There is one nation in the world that is very successful economically, grows, the economy grows, and they have an awful lot of investment in the community, and that's Monaco. And they have a tax system exactly like the fair tax. People will come in there and risk capital and grow the economy. I don't believe that proposal by Biden has a prayer, even among Democrats. However, he's been doing so much extra legislatively that I wouldn't be surprised to see if he thinks he can do it by regulation. All of it, as you know, the Supreme Court has struck down his authority to eliminate school loans for students. He said he doesn't have authority at spending money. It has to start in Congress. He's still doing it, even though the Supreme Court has struck it down. He's just ignoring the decision. I'm amazed that there's not some lawyers who have that in court right now and have a restraining order.
Oh, merciful. I'll tell you what, our time has gotten away from us here on Fairtax Power Radio. So, Congressman, thank you so much for your time to talk with us. We would certainly like to have you back at some future date.
Do it. Thank you.
All right. Well, that is going to wrap up this edition of Fairtax Power Radio. Thank you so much for watching, listening, and sharing the videos. Until we meet again, I'm Bob Paxton.
I'm Bob Scarborough.
I'm John Linder.
And we are the Fairtax Guys, reminding you the fair tax is the only truly fair tax. And once you understand it,
you'll demand it.
So what would you do for her?
Well, we've got several programs that will help her. We just need to find out how much she makes. But the good news is, the less she does, the more we can help.
Yeah.
If I may, with the fair tax, we wouldn't even tax her income. So the more she makes, the more she has.
But still, a consumption tax could eat up a lot of her income.
Which is why at the beginning of every month, we're actually going to give back all that she pays in taxes on basic necessities.
You're going to give her back her taxes?
Every month, on everything taxed on basic necessities. But we're also going to give it back to you and to every American citizen.
Why?
Well, we believe taxes